So you've finished texturing your asset and you want to get the model and the textures into the Unreal Engine. I'm going to start by exporting the textures from Substance Painter. Go up to File, select Export Textures from the drop-down menu. Because when I created this project I selected the Unreal Engine package at the start, it's automatically selected that as the output template here. But what you're going to want to change is the output directory here. By default it's going to dump this in the Substance Engine export folder, which is absolutely hopeless and we don't want to use that. So I have a folder right here ready that I want to send my textures to in a much more organized way. I'm going to create a new folder for these table textures, select that folder, and you can pretty much leave everything else as standard, so long as you have your output directory set and your output template set to Unreal Engine packaged. Just press export in the bottom corner. It'll chuck out your textures and you can close this window. You're now done in Substance Painter. Here in Unreal, I'm going to set up my folder structure ready for my imported assets. If you're putting multiple assets into a project, you can rapidly end up with hundreds and hundreds of textures and materials and meshes, so it's important to set up your folder structure in such a way that it makes sense to you. I'm going to begin by creating a new folder for my assets. I'm going to go into this assets folder and create a new folder for my 3D meshes, and another folder for my textures. The point. We're going to begin by bringing in my 3D model. So I've opened up my meshes folder here, and I have a variety of assets that I want to bring into this project here then. So here's the table that I just textured in Substance Painter, except it's not. This is just the FBX file that I exported from Blender or 3ds Max or Maya. The FBX file on its own currently doesn't have any of the textures or content baked into it. It's just an empty file. So I'm going to drag that into Unreal and drop it here in the content browser, and this will open up the import content window. This is quite an important change from previous versions of Unreal. This import content window, don't ignore it. It's got a lot of options. It can be quite intimidating, but not setting up your import content window properly will result in your assets being rendered incorrectly. You'll see shadows in the wrong places and you'll see curves where you should have flat surfaces. So first thing I'm going to do is force this mesh as a static mesh. I know I didn't want any animations. This is simply a static piece of furniture. So I'm going to tell Unreal I'm sending you a static mesh. Next, just underneath this, under Common Meshes, there is this Build option, which is hidden by default. Click the little drop-down menu to open up the Build menu. Unreal tries to recalculate the normals and tangents on your meshes when you import them. If you leave these checked by default, more often than not, this will actually break your meshes. They will render incorrectly. If you're completely happy with how they looked in Blender, Max or Maya, uncheck these boxes and don't let Unreal touch your work. Disable the build options here. Next, when we come down to the static mesh options, there's one option here in the middle called Combine Static Meshes. If you like to model in multiple pieces and kit bash them all together to create one large mesh, or if you've forgotten to attach all of your pieces together or join them together in Blender, selecting this box here will ensure that all of your static meshes are glued together and they only import as one mesh into Unreal. Otherwise, your 3D model will be brought into Unreal in all of its constituent parts, and that can end up with dozens or hundreds of static meshes instead of just one. So combined static meshes can be very useful. Finally, we're just going to come all the way down to the textures and the materials import here. I don't want Unreal to try and create any new textures or materials. I'm going to set them up myself. So I'm going to disable the material and texture imports. Once you've done this once, this project will remember your import settings. So don't worry if that was a lot of steps just to bring in a static mesh. You only have to do it once. Press import, and there is my round wooden table. I can place it in, make sure everything looks right, make sure the shadows are in the right place, make sure everything is rendering as I expect it to do, And the next step will be to create our materials and bring in our textures. Just like importing the mesh itself, when we get our textures, locate them wherever you've saved your textures, OneDrive or on your own machine, and you can either drag and drop them in like I just did on the round wooden table, or if you want, you can import them using the import options here in Unreal. This does exactly the same thing. It's just using Unreal's browser instead of using your Windows Explorer. So here are my 3 table textures. I'm just going to select all 3 of them by holding down Shift and selecting them all. And pressing Open, Unreal will automatically detect what kind of file these textures are and should set them up accordingly. There's only one recurring problem with linking Unreal and Substance Painter currently, and that is the ambient occlusion, roughness and metallic texture, which is the crazy coloured texture we've got here. You have 3 default textures that are thrown out by that packaged Unreal project setting in Substance Painter. The first one here is the base colour. Base colour just contains the flat albedo information. This is just raw colour information ready to be shaded and shadowed. The second map is the normal map. This contains the surface details and imperfections. This one's very, very subtle. I have to zoom right in before you can see any details here, and that's just a little bit of wood grain on the table. And then this third texture is the ambient occlusion, roughness and metallic map. This is actually 3 textures packaged into one. If I disable the blue and green channels, this is the red channel only, and this is the ambient occlusion for this mesh. This is the shadowing that is added to give your model a bit more depth and a sense of being 3D. The green channel is the roughness. This is what affects the reflections and smoothness off of the surface of your mesh. And the blue is the metallic channel. Since this is a wooden table, that's completely blank. I've got nothing in there. When you layer all 3 of them together, you get this very vibrantly coloured occlusion, roughness, metallic material. Now, unfortunately, Unreal reads this material as using the sRGB color space here on the right hand side in the details panel. Uncheck this box and you'll notice that the colors change quite a lot. If I turn it back on and off, you can see that again. When Substance saved the file, it did not mean it to be read as an sRGB color file. It meant it to be read as linear color. Don't worry if you don't understand that now. All you need to know is disable that if you want your models to look exactly like they do in Substance Painter. If you leave this box checked by accident, your models will appear glossy and shiny, and they just won't quite look the same. So uncheck sRGB for the ORM texture. The other 2 you can leave exactly as they are. Unreal will actually set those 2 up correctly. Let's create a material for use on this wooden table. Either use the Add Content button or right-click anywhere in the content browser. They operate the same menu, and create a new material. I'm going to name this M for material _ table. You name yours whatever your meshes are. Please try and keep your material names sensible. It will make it a lot easier for you to set up your project in the future. Inside the table material, I have my material graph here. The material graph contains one giant output node. This is where you will plug all of our textures into. So I'm going to open up my content browser and find my textures. Oh wait, I put my textures in the wrong folder. It doesn't matter, you can move these at any time. So just for the sake of being organized, I'm going to move them now. Let me select all 3 of my textures and I can drag them onto the textures folder and just choose move here. That'll shove them into the correct folder, so now I can actually navigate in a more sensible way. Right then, let's actually use the textures. Select all 3 of the textures here. You can't drag select, so you have to either hold down Control and click on each one, or hold down Shift and click at the start and end to grab all of them, and drag them into your materials editor. If you're ever confused about how to set up the materials in Unreal, select one of your texture sample nodes and just move your mouse over the name of the file. Substance Painter tells you which node this needs to be plugged into in the file name. So this is called round wooden table v2 wooden table _ base color. So I know that this texture is to go into the base color node. Next one is this blue texture. I know if we look at the end of the file name, this is called the normal, so I know that this has to go into the normal input. And then the occlusion roughness metallic map I talked about earlier, if I mouse over that, you can see its file name, wooden table v2 underscore wooden table underscore occlusion roughness metallic. I already described how these are embedded into the red, green and blue channels separately. If you forget which one is which, they're in order in the name. Occlusion is red, roughness is green, and metallic is blue. So red goes into ambient occlusion, green goes into roughness, and blue goes into metallic. And that should be our material setup. If you want to preview your material here in the material editor, locate your static mesh and just left click on it once to select it, and then you can click on this little Lego brick icon just above the preview window here to preview it here in the materials editor, so you can check without having to fully compile and test it in the level. So I know my material is set up correctly now. Time to finish setting up the mesh by applying the material to it. If you just drag your material onto an instance of your mesh in the level, it will look like that's worked. And it has. We have applied the material to this one table. But if I want to add any more tables into the level, each of them I then also need to add the material to. This gets frustrating and time consuming. So instead of doing this, we're going to set up the basic mesh itself to use the correct material straight away. Double click on it to open up the mesh viewer, mesh editor. And here in the details panel we have its material slots. I'm just going to select my material from the drop down menu here. That's where it's important to name things properly. You can also press Ctrl and Spacebar to pop up the content browser and drag and drop. It's Unreal, there's multiple ways of doing that. So once your material is applied inside this static mesh editor, save it and close it, and you'll notice those two previously untextured tables are now textured, and every time I place a new table in this level, it will also be textured automatically. So I'm just going to do that again with a few more assets, repeating the process and showing you the steps, including what happens if you've got a lot of textures to import and edit all at once. I've only shown you how to do this with a single set of textures for a single mesh. I'm going to start just like before by bringing in the static meshes that I want to import. I'm going to open up my meshes folder. I'm going to find the meshes that I want to bring in. Here is a corner, a doorway and a floor. I'm just going to drag them into my content browser to import them. I'm going to tell Unreal that these are static meshes. I'm going to double check that recompute normals and recompute tangents is disabled. I'm going to make sure that we are combining static meshes so that I only get one mesh if I need it. And I don't want Unreal to import the materials or the textures automatically. I'm going to do that myself. You may also want to disable Nanite. If you are not using it, you can do that from this menu as well. I don't care, I'm going to leave it on for now. So I'm just going to press import. And now I've got a floor, a doorway and a corner mesh here. I'm going to now bring in the textures for those three by going into my textures folder. Here is my wall textures. Click and dragging them into Unreal. And remember, I've got to disable the sRGB pin on my my occlusion roughness and metallic map. You should see the colors shift when you disable that. There we go. Enabled and disabled. No sRGB on there. I want a new material. So I'm just going to call m_wall. Open up the material. Find my textures for my wall and bring them in. This is the base color. I can see that from its name. This is the normal. That's usually blue, so that's easy to spot. And then finally the occlusion, roughness and metallic texture. To double check you've got this right, make sure the sampler says linear color. Red ambient occlusion, green for roughness and blue for metallic. And now I can open up my wall textures and apply my wall textures to them. I've set up these meshes so I can use a single texture to texture multiple meshes at the same time. If you're interested in learning more, I'll put together a tutorial about that. Now I need to do the floor, so again, I'm just going to find my import. There is my wooden floor. Here's my textures for the wooden floor. I'm going to go into the textures folder, bring in my textures. And let's say I brought in 30 or 40 or more textures at once. Opening up each one of these ORM textures individually to disable the sRGB settings is extremely time consuming and annoying. So what you can do instead is use some of the automatic filtering here in Unreal to make your life easier. If I type in something like OCC for occlusion, it will filter out and only show me the occlusion roughness metallic maps. I can then select all of them at once, right click, go to Asset Actions, and choose Edit Selection in Property Matrix. This will pop up this window which allows you to change multiple things about these assets all in one go. So I can see that for 2 of these assets I've already disabled sRGB, and 1 of them I've left it on. So let's switch that off, save it, and I can close the Asset Matrix Editor. It just makes it easier to filter out lots of assets and edit all of them at once rather than doing it one by one. So clear that filter. There's my textures. I want a new material for my floor. I'm going to find my floor textures, and again, repeat the same process. This can get very time consuming and frustrating, plugging each of these in every single time. So if you don't want to, why not, instead of creating a new material, just duplicate one of your existing ones? Here's the wall texture, here's the wall material. I'm going to duplicate it and rename it floor. Open up the floor texture, and I can just change these texture samples by selecting the node and swapping it out for the floor base color, the floor normal, and the floor ambient occlusion, roughness and metallic texture. And that's my floor setup. Open up the floor mesh, change its material to floor, and I'm now ready to start dropping in my meshes and assembling an interior with fully textured meshes. So that's importing from Substance Painter to Unreal, and how to configure your textures and how to set up your materials so that they are as reusable as possible.